My husband gave his drug-addicted sister keys to my inherited house behind my back, and she destroyed all my family photos looking for the will. I never thought I would find myself in this situation, but recent events have forced me to share my story. I've been married to my husband, Jack, 32M, for 4 years. While our marriage started wonderfully, his family has always been a source of tension, particularly regarding his sister, Amy, 35F. Some background about Amy. She's been struggling with drug addiction since she was 16. It started with marijuana and quickly escalated to harder drugs. She dropped out of high school in her senior year and has never held a steady job. My in-laws, Tom, 65M, and Sarah, 62F, have enabled her behavior for nearly 20 years. They've paid for multiple rehab stays, countless apartments, cars, and legal fees. Every time Amy claims she's clean and ready to turn her life around, they believe her and pour more money into helping her start fresh. But it always ends the same way, Amy relapsing and disappearing for weeks or months, only to return when she needs more money. I met Jack 5 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. He was different from his family, responsible, hardworking, and seemingly aware of how toxic their enabling of Amy had become. During our dating period, he often expressed frustration about how his parents handled Amy's addiction. He told me stories about how they'd emptied their retirement accounts multiple times to bail Amy out of trouble and how she'd stolen from them repeatedly. But they always forgave her because she was sick and needed help. When we got married, Jack promised me that we would maintain strong boundaries with his family, especially regarding financial matters. We agreed never to lend money to Amy or get involved in her drama. This worked well for the first 3 years of our marriage, mainly because Amy was living in another state with her boyfriend and only contacted the family when she needed money. Everything changed 6 months ago when my beloved aunt, Helen, passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. Helen had practically raised me after my mother, her sister, died from cancer when I was 12. She never married or had children of her own, instead devoting her life to her career as a pediatrician and being there for me as I grew up. I spent every weekend at her house. She helped me with homework, attended all my school events, and was basically my second mother. When I got married, she was the one who walked me down the aisle since my father wasn't in the picture. Helen's death devastated me, but what I didn't expect was her leaving me her entire estate, worth approximately $900,000, including her beautiful Victorian house that she'd lovingly restored over the years. I knew she was well off, but the inheritance came as a complete surprise. In her will, she wrote that she wanted me to have financial security and hoped I would continue maintaining the house she loved so much. The problem started when Amy moved back to our city 3 months ago after breaking up with her boyfriend. She was living with Tom and Sarah again and somehow found out about my inheritance through family gossip. At first, it was just occasional hints about how she needed money for a fresh start. Then the calls started coming daily. She would call or text at all hours, sometimes crying about being broke and hungry, other times angry and demanding that I help her because that's what family does. I blocked her number after she started sending threatening messages about how I was hoarding money while she suffered. That's when she started showing up at our house unannounced. The first few times, Jack turned her away, but I could see he was wavering. His parents were constantly calling him, telling him how cruel it was that we had so much money but wouldn't help his sister. The situation reached a breaking point last month when she showed up at our door at 2 a.m., clearly high on something. She was screaming about how I was selfish for not sharing my aunt's money with a family who needed it. When I refused to open the door, she tried to break in through a window. I had to call the police to remove her. Instead of being concerned about their daughter's behavior, Tom and Sarah were furious with me for involving law enforcement. They showed up at our house the next day, yelling about how I could have ruined Amy's life by getting her arrested. What really hurt was Jack's reaction. He started suggesting that maybe we should give Amy some money to keep the peace in the family. When I reminded him of our agreement about boundaries, he said this was different because it wasn't our hard-earned money, but an inheritance that had fallen into my lap. His parents called him daily to guilt-trip him about how I was destroying the family with my selfishness. I could see their manipulation was working. I've tried explaining to them that giving Amy money would only enable her addiction, but they won't listen. Sarah actually told me that if Amy dies from an overdose, it will be my fault for not helping her when I had the means to do so. They seem to think that because I didn't earn this inheritance, I have no right to decide how it's used. The money and house from Helen means so much more to me than just financial security. They are my last connection to the woman who stepped in as my mother when I lost my own. The house is filled with memories of my childhood and teen years. The thought of selling it or using that money to enable Amy's addiction feels like a betrayal of Helen's memory. But the constant pressure from my in-laws is taking a toll on my marriage. Jack has started sleeping in the guest room because of our arguments about this. His family's manipulation is working, and he's beginning to see me as the villain in this situation. I don't want to lose my marriage, but I also won't disrespect my aunt's memory by enabling someone's addiction. I feel stuck between protecting my inheritance and saving my marriage. I honestly don't know what to do anymore. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't crazy for wanting to protect my inheritance. Unfortunately, things have gotten much worse since I last posted. Last week, I got a call from Mrs. Jenkins, my Aunt Helen's next-door neighbor of 20 years. She was hysterical, telling me she'd heard glass break and saw someone climbing through a broken window at Helen's house. I immediately called the police and rushed over there. By the time I arrived, 3 police cars were already at the scene, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw who they were putting in handcuffs. Amy. The damage she caused is devastating. She broke in through the kitchen window and systematically went through every room in the house looking for valuables. The antique secretary desk where Helen kept her medical journals was completely destroyed. Family photos dating back to the 1940s were torn from their frames and scattered across the floor, many of them damaged beyond repair. These included the only photos I had of my mother from her childhood. The worst part was Helen's bedroom. Amy had dumped all the drawers out, thrown clothes everywhere, and even ripped open the mattress looking for hidden valuables. She found Helen's jewelry box, the one containing my grandmother's wedding ring that Helen had promised to give me on my 30th birthday, and emptied it completely. When the police searched her, they only found a few pieces she'd already sold to a pawn shop for drug money. But here's where things get even more twisted. While the police were taking Amy's statement, she kept insisting she had permission to be there. That's when I found out something that made me physically sick. Jack had given her a key to the house. My husband, who had promised to support me in maintaining boundaries, went behind my back and gave my drug-addicted sister-in-law access to my property. When I confronted Jack that evening, his excuses made everything worse. He admitted that his parents had been pressuring him for weeks about Amy needing a place to stay. They convinced him that if Amy had a stable living environment, she might finally get clean. They painted a picture of Amy living in the house, getting a job locally, and rebuilding her life. Jack actually believed she would respect the property because it was family helping family. I was speechless. Not only had he betrayed my trust, but he also couldn't see how naive and manipulated he'd been. This was the same Amy who had stolen from her own parents countless times, the same Amy who had sold her mother's cancer medication for drug money 3 years ago. Yet somehow, Jack thought she would respect my aunt's house. Within hours of this revelation, Tom and Sarah started calling nonstop. They were trying to convince me not to press charges against Amy. Sarah was crying about how jail would ruin Amy's life, how she's sick and needs help, not punishment. Tom offered to pay for all the damages if I would drop the charges. When I refused, he switched to threats, saying if I sent his daughter to jail, he would make sure everyone in the family knew what a vindictive person I was. Jack sat there during this entire conversation saying nothing while his parents berated and threatened me. That was the moment I realized my marriage was probably over. The man I married, the one who had promised to stand by me and maintain boundaries with his family, had disappeared. In his place was someone who would rather betray my trust than stand up to his parents. I packed enough clothes for a few weeks and checked into a hotel. I couldn't stay in our house anymore. I was shaken to the core, not only by Amy's actions but by Jack's complete failure to protect me and my late aunt's legacy.